The soup had gone lukewarm, but I kept stirring anyway. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. Not loud, just enough to remind me how quiet everything else had become. I sat at the edge of the table, the one with a dent on the left leg. My spoon tapped the bowl. No one looked up. From the next room came laughter. Not cruel, just careless. They were talking about a movie. Something about a dinner scene. Forks clinked. A glass was set down. No one said my name. I lifted the spoon. Sipped slowly. Too salty. Or maybe that was just me. I looked across the table. An empty chair. My husband's old seat. He'd always carve the roast. Ask if I wanted an end piece. Refill my tea without speaking. He knew what I liked. Now it was just me. Me and the sunflower tablecloth I stitched in 1982. I reached for a napkin. The faded cotton one Melissa said didn't match her aesthetic. I used it anyway. Then came more laughter. Louder this time. That's when I put the spoon down. Not because I was full. Because I refused to keep swallowing invisibility. I closed my eyes. Breathed in. Not the soup. The memory. Of a time I was expected. Counted. Heard. Now even my footsteps felt like clutter in their home. I stood up. Chair creaked behind me. No one paused. The room kept buzzing without me. But something inside me began to still. And I thought, if there's no seat for me at your table, I'll build one where silence becomes sanctuary. Where tea is served and nobody's left unseen. Have you ever felt invisible in a house full of voices? Share where you're listening from. You are not alone. I was never the kind of woman who asked for much. Not when I was young. And certainly not now. After my husband passed, I stayed in the same house for 17 more years. Paid off the mortgage. Tended the roses. Cooked dinner for one. And waited for Sundays. That's when David came by. Sometimes with groceries. Sometimes just for a quick hello. It was enough back then. But when my knees got stiff and the stairs turned mean, he said I should come live with them. We've got space, Ma. It'll be good to have you around. Melissa works from home. The kids will love seeing you more. It sounded nice. Better than silence and soup. So I packed my things. Just the basics. My husband's old coat. My teapot. The pillow I liked best. Their house was new. Bigger. Shinier. Double garage. White walls. Too many mirrors. The sidewalk smelled like fresh paint. The kitchen had no crumbs in it. Melissa greeted me with a smile. David carried my bag. The girls hugged me with the politeness children learn too soon. My room was upstairs. A guest room. Small. But it had a window. And I told myself that was enough. The first week felt warm. David made pancakes on Sunday. The girls drew me pictures. Melissa even asked what kind of tea I liked. I thought, maybe this could work. I didn't need much. Just a chair at the table. A question about my day. A reason to wear earrings again. But routines settle fast. And comfort fades quicker when it isn't yours. By the second week, Melissa had meetings through dinner. David got quieter. The girls had dance or homework or both. One evening, I made stew. Left it warming on the stove. No one came down. I waited. Then I ate alone. The spoon felt heavier than the whole pot. I stared at the empty seat across from me. And thought. Am I company or clutter? The house was full. But I was beginning to shrink. Not in body. In place. Have you ever felt yourself fading slowly in a room that once welcomed you? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters here. There was a time David used to tell me everything. He'd sit on the kitchen floor, legs crossed, swinging his feet, telling me about space missions and cartoons and the mean lunch lady. His voice filled the house. I used to hush him only so I could hear more. Now the house was quiet. Quiet in a way that doesn't invite you in. One night, I asked if we could all have dinner together. Just once. One evening. Like old times. David smiled. But it was the kind of smile that stops before it reaches the eyes. "Ma, we're just juggling a lot right now. You understand, right?" I nodded. Because saying no felt like begging. And I've never begged for a seat at my own family's table. A few days later, I baked banana bread. The kind with walnuts. The kind David always loved. I left it on the counter. Still warm. Wrapped in a soft tea towel. When I came back, half was gone. No note. No thank you. Just crumbs. And silence. So I stopped baking. Stopped offering. And started making my meals smaller, earlier, quieter. Then one afternoon, Melissa asked, "Would you mind switching rooms with the girls? They want to be closer to the Wi-Fi." She laughed like it was funny. I didn't laugh. But I moved. Downstairs to the den. No windows. Just a fold-out couch and a metal filing cabinet with a drawer that stuck. I told myself it was fine. At least I didn't have to climb stairs. That night I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark. I missed my own chipped teacups. My wallpaper with faded blue stripes. The silence that used to feel like mine. This silence belonged to someone else. And it did not hold me. Sometimes, I sat in the laundry room just to hear the washer thump and hum. It was the only heartbeat in the house that still acknowledged me. And in those hours between rinses and folds, I started counting. Not the towels. Not the minutes. The ways I was disappearing. Have you ever moved into someone's home and lost your place in your own story? Tell me. I'll listen. It wasn't cruel. Not exactly. Just skiet. Tukiet. Once I left a small note on the fridge. "Dinner's ready if anyone's hungry." I made chicken and cornbread. An hour passed. The note disappeared. But the pot sat untouched. David was in the garage fixing something. Melissa on a headset upstairs. The girls were laughing at a phone screen, their faces glowing in a world I couldn't enter. I went back to the den. Saturday on the fold-out and looked at my shoes. 3 pairs. One for walking, one for church, one for comfort. All lined up neatly. Like I was trying to prove I still belonged. That weekend, Melissa hosted her book club. A dozen women filled the kitchen. Their laughter clipped polished sharp around the edges. I stayed out of the way. In the laundry room again. A plate of cookies beside me. No one asked if I'd join. I stared through the back door. The sky, turning soft. Oregon twilight used to feel like home. Now it looked like a hallway to somewhere else. I sipped lukewarm tea from a chipped mug. The one I brought from my old kitchen. It still said "You are enough" in faded cursive. I whispered to it. Then why do I feel like too much, and never enough at the same time? I set the mug down. Gently. And I realized. If I wanted warmth, it wouldn't come from rooms where no one looks up. What I missed was not being served. Not even being asked. Just being expected. Counted. Known. I used to be the center of every meal. The voice behind every birthday cake. Now I was a footnote in my own kitchen. And the quiet was starting to sound like goodbye. Have you ever watched a room move on without you while you were still in it? Let me know below. Your truth matters here. It happened on a Thursday. I wasn't supposed to hear it. The girls were in the living room. One of them whispered, "She's always watching." It's weird. Then a pause. And softer still, Mom said not to mind her. She's just old. I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of clean towels. My hands stopped moving. I didn't say anything. Didn't open the door. Didn't correct them. Just stood there. Heart quiet. Like it had stepped out of the room. Later that evening, Melissa passed me in the hall. She smiled. A quick, polite thing. Like you give to a neighbor, not someone who raised your husband. She said, "You okay?" I nodded. Of course. All good. Then I walked back to the den, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the fold-out. I looked at the same 3 shoes in the corner. Still neat. Still quiet. Still trying. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, but because something inside me had finally stopped fighting. The next morning I made French toast. Extra cinnamon. The kind David used to ask for every Sunday. I set the table. 5 plates. 5 forks. 5 napkins folded neat. And I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Voices upstairs. Laughter. But no footsteps. Eventually, David came down. Already dressed for work. He glanced at the table. "Oh, I didn't know you were making breakfast." He poured coffee into a travel mug. Kissed the top of my head. Then left. No bite. No pause. Just gone. Melissa came down next. Looked at the table. Then at me. "Sorry. We already ate upstairs. The girls had school." She picked up her laptop. And disappeared. The French toast sat there. Growing cold. Soaked through with syrup. And I stood beside it. Holding a fork that didn't belong anywhere anymore. Have you ever made something with love and watched it be ignored like air? Tell me. I'll understand. By noon the kitchen was spotless. Melissa liked it that way. No clutter. No smells that linger. I packed the French toast into a container. Wrote Monday on the lid even though I knew no one would touch it. I opened the pantry. My tea box was gone. I looked around. Found it in the laundry room. Next to the lint roller and detergent. Tucked behind an old mop. I carried it back. Hands steady. But my chest felt loose. Like a curtain someone forgot to hook. In the den, I sat on the edge of the couch. Poured hot water into my chipped mug. No sugar. No lemon. Just tea and the silence that always arrived before noon. I stared at the wall. Same beige paint. Same photo from 20 years ago. David in his cap and gown. Me in the background. Half cut off. That photo used to make me proud. Now it just made me feel small. Later that day, the girls came home from school. Backpacks dropped. Shoes kicked off. Voices fast and loud. They passed by my door. One of them said, "Don't look. She's probably in there again." I didn't open the door. Didn't ask. In where? Didn't say I'm not a shadow. Just sat on the fold-out couch. Hands folded. Heart. Shrinking. That evening, Melissa reheated lasagna. Didn't set a place for me. Just left a plate in the microwave. With a note. Warm for 1 minute. I ate in the den. Television on mute. Didn't taste much. Just the edges of something that used to be comfort. Now soggy and flat. Before bed, I looked in the mirror. Lines deeper than I remembered. Eyes softer. Not sad. Just quiet. I touched my face. Then the little gold cross I still wore around my neck. No one ever asked what it meant anymore. I whispered. Maybe this isn't home. Maybe I've just been passing through. Like steam on a window. Present. Until forgotten. Have you ever looked at your reflection and not recognized your own place in the world? Leave a whisper in the comments. Some truths only land when shared. The house was quiet the next morning. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum softer. I folded my blanket, smoothed the creases on the couch, and took a slow breath. Outside clouds hung low over the neighborhood. Soft gray, like the sky had run out of things to say. I boiled water, made my tea, and watched the steam rise. Curling like an old memory, on the table I laid out 3 things. My notebook, my wallet, and a photograph from 1978. David, 7 years old, covered in dirt, holding a worm, smiling like the world was still magic. I placed it face down. By 8:30 Melissa came downstairs, Bluetooth earpiece in, eyes on her phone. "Morning," she said. Without looking, I nodded. Didn't bother with words. David was already in the garage, tuning something, pretending not to hear the quiet inside. I moved carefully, not rushed, not sneaking, just done. I packed 1 small suitcase, just clothes, my tea tin, and a framed note my husband once wrote. It said, "Come back soon. I miss the sound of your spoon in the teacup." I placed it gently between shirts. When I opened the front door, the air smelled like wet leaves. And something older. Something mine. I stood on the porch. Looked back once. Not for them, but for the version of me that waited too long. I walked to the curb. Started the car. The one David said was too old to bother with. It rumbled awake. Like it still remembered the woman I used to be. And I drove. Past the grocery store where I taught David to count change. Past the library where I once read to children. Past the turns that never led back to me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just drove. Toward something unnamed. But full of breath. Somewhere, a chair waited. And this time it would face me. What does a mother do when her name is no longer needed? She remembers it herself. And begins again. Would you have left too? Or stayed for one more lukewarm Sunday? The motel was just off the highway. A low building with chipped paint. And a blinking sign that read, "Welcome." Room 7 smelled like old carpet. And lemon cleaner that didn't quite cover the years. I placed my suitcase on the bed. Saturday beside it. Listened to the heater groan alive. Outside rain began to fall. Soft at first. Then, steady. Like the sky couldn't hold itself together anymore. I didn't unpack. There wasn't much to unfold. Just enough to remind me. I had once belonged somewhere. I made tea. Using the motel's tiny kettle. The kind that clicked too loudly when it finished. I drank slowly, watching the steam rise toward the stained ceiling. My fingers curled around the mug, searching for warmth. Not from the tea, but from the weight of holding something real. There were no pictures on the walls. No books. No smell of cinnamon or bread. Just hums. Buzzing. Air that didn't know my name. I took out my notebook. Wrote one line. I am not lost. Just unheld. Then I underlined it. 3 times. That evening, I walked to the gas station down the road. Bought a sandwich. And a chocolate bar. Because grief is still hungry. Even when the heart has no appetite. The cashier said, "Cold night out there." I nodded. Didn't answer. Back in the room I ate sitting on the edge of the bed. No plate. No grace. Just bites. And silence. Later I laid down fully dressed. The blanket scratchy. The light flickering in the hallway outside. and I stared at the ceiling. No voices. No footsteps. No door creaking open to ask what's for dinner, Ma. Just rain. And a heartbeat that slowed but didn't stop. I turned off the lamp, let the dark settle over me, and whispered. I chose this. I did. But even choices can ache. Would you have felt safer in a motel alone than in a house where no one knocks? We invite you to share your truth. What moment made you reclaim yourself? The next morning I woke early, not because I wanted to, but because the light through the thin curtains wouldn't let me sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped the motel blanket around my shoulders, and stared at the floor. There's something about cheap carpet. The way it holds every footprint. Even after the person is gone, I finished the rest of the sandwich. Cold now, but soft in the center. Then I stepped outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, still full of unsaid things. I drove without a map, down a 2-lane road, past signs I didn't read, past towns I couldn't name. Somewhere, a breeze carried the scent of wet pine. And I rolled the window down, just to breathe something that wasn't recycled air. Then I saw it. A little building, tucked between an antique shop and a closed bakery. Its windows dusty, but not broken. Its paint faded, but not peeling. There was a for lease sign taped crookedly on the door. I parked across the street. Got out. Walked slowly. The sidewalk still held the curve of our footsteps. Me and my husband. 30 years ago. We used to come here every fall, when the leaves were loud, and the world felt small in the right way. Back then, this was a tea shop, run by a woman named June. She wore aprons with embroidered pockets, and served pie that tasted like a kept promise. We'd sit by the window, share a pot of chamomile, and talk about maybe, one day, running a place like this. I put my hand on the dusty glass, felt the cold seep through my palm, and something inside me opened. Not wide, not loud, just enough to whisper. What if this is not an ending, but a return? Not to the life I had, but to the part of me that was never anyone's guest, only the host of small kindnesses. The key was still in the lock, rusty, but waiting, and I thought, maybe warmth is something I can build from the ground up. Would you unlock the door to something lost if your name was no longer on theirs? That evening, I drove back to the motel, but something had shifted. Not the room, not the bed, not the blinking sign outside. Me. I sat on the edge of the mattress, notebook in hand, and began to write. Things I remembered. Things I missed. Warm bread. Soft napkins. A chair that waited for someone without asking who. I wrote the words, table for two, in the center of the page. Then I underlined them. Not once. Not twice. But 3 times. The pen ink bled a little. Like it too had waited too long to begin. The next morning, I called the number on the sign. The woman sounded surprised. Said the place had been empty for years. No one stayed long. No one saw the point. I told her I'm not looking for a business. Just a place to sit. And maybe serve something warm. She paused, then said, come by tomorrow. We'll sign the papers. I hung up. Held the phone a moment longer. Felt its quiet. Like an old friend. Listening. I drove back to the tea shop. Parked in the same spot. And walked the length of the floor. Wood creaked beneath my steps. Like it still remembered footsteps from long ago. The walls were bare. The shelves dusty. But the bones were good. I touched the corner where a table once stood. and saw it. Clear as if it had never left. A round table. 2 mismatched chairs. 1 teacup chipped. 1 still whole. And across from me someone I didn't know yet, but who needed to be seen. Not fed. Not fixed. Just seen. I sat down on the floor, back against the window, sunlight reaching toward me, like a promise. And I whispered, if they couldn't make space for me, then I will make space for someone who needs it more. No big signs. No opening hours. Just warmth. A kettle that never runs dry. And a quiet table. For 2, have you ever rebuilt something not from anger, but from quiet need? We invite you to share your story. Someone out there needs your truth. The kettle hissed. But I didn't move. It was morning. I had steeped tea, but forgot to drink it. The steam curled gently, and faded into nothing. I sat at the little round table. 2 cups laid out, but only my hand on the wood. There had been no visitors for 3 days. Not even Edith. Not even Leo. The bell above the door hadn't made a sound. I watched dust gather on the edge of the windowsill. A tiny thread of spider silk danced in the light, unafraid of being seen. And I thought, how strange, that something so small could claim space without apology. I looked down at my hands. They rested still. Fingers curled, palm soft, but quiet. No motion. No purpose. Like even they had forgotten what they were for. Behind me the shelf of old cups. Each one chosen. Each one placed with care. But no one had touched them lately. I had stopped wiping the glass clean. Stopped replacing the flowers. The little vase was now just stems. Dry. Cracked. The sign outside still said open. But I wondered if that mattered anymore. I stood slowly, body creaking like the floor, and poured the cold tea into the sink. It gurgled down, unnoticed, unmissed. I looked out the window. The street was still. Just one old bus rolling past. Empty seats inside. Like echoes of people who didn't stay long. I whispered. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too much. And not enough. All at once. I wiped my hands on the apron I still wore. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me I was still someone who served. Even if there was no one left to receive it. That afternoon I went back to the motel. The one I hadn't fully left. Not really. Room 7 still held my backup cardigan. A tin of lavender candies. A box of tissues with one corner bent. I sat on the bed. Not to rest, but to feel the weight of something that still held me. Not warmly, not kindly, but at least it didn't push me out. I turned on the lamp, let its yellow light spill across my knees, and I stared. At the wall, at the wallpaper, at the silence. I stayed that way until the light changed, and shadows stretched long like old regrets. No one called. No one knocked. The bell at the shop stayed quiet, even in my mind, and that's when it hit. Not loud, not sudden, but like a slow tear across something sacred. Maybe I wasn't building anything. Maybe I was just passing time in a prettier room. Would anyone even notice if the tea shop stayed closed for good? The next morning, I didn't open the shop. I stayed in the motel room. Listened to the heater wheeze. Its sound reminded me of breath when it's too tired to be called living. I poured tea. Didn't drink it. Just watched the steam rise and vanish. Again and again. Like trying to hold on to something that wouldn't stay. At noon, I walked to the gas station. Bought a sandwich. Let the man behind the counter ask if I wanted chips. I said no. and realized that was the only word I'd spoken that day. Back in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, unwrapped the sandwich. The bread was dry, but it stayed together, more than I could say for myself. There was a mirror across the room. Not big, just enough to catch my face. I looked without blinking. The lines were deeper. Not from age. From silence. The eyes not sad. Just emptied of the need to be seen. I touched the edge of the frame. Cold, unfeeling, but honest. Then I whispered, "Is this who I am now, a woman who leaves no dent when she disappears?" That night, I returned to the shop. Just to sit. Didn't unlock the door. Didn't light the candle. I sat at the table. No tea. No cups. Just me. And the echo of what I had tried to create. It felt small. Not because the space had shrunk, but because I had. I remembered the first time I held my son. His fingers wrapped around mine. Like I was gravity. Like I mattered. And now I couldn't even find my own center. I laid my head on the table, cheek pressed to the cool wood, and let myself go quiet. Fully quiet. Not thinking. Not planning. Just still. And then a sound. Faint. Soft. Unexpected. A knock. At the door. I didn't move. Maybe it was wind. Maybe memory. Then again. A second knock. Not urgent. Just there. I lifted my head. Stood slowly. My knees ached but held. I walked to the door. Didn't open it. Just placed my hand on the frame. Waited. But no third knock came. No voice. No face. Just silence again. But somehow it felt different. Not empty. Not yet full. But waiting. Like a breath held before a word. And I thought maybe I haven't been erased. Maybe I've just paused. I stepped back. Lit the candle. Watched its glow bloom on the table. And I whispered, "If this is rock bottom, then let it be where something grows. Even if no one sees it yet. Even if it's just me. Breathing again. Alone. But whole." The next morning I opened the shop again. No grand reason. No sudden courage. Just a quiet tug in my chest. The kettle took longer to boil. Or maybe I just noticed how long it always took. I wiped the table slowly. Pressed the cloth down. As if trying to smooth myself too. 2 cups. 1 candle. Same table. But something felt less fragile. I didn't wait for the bell to ring. I just sat. Hands wrapped around the mug. Breathing in the chamomile. Not expecting. Just being. That afternoon a woman passed by. She didn't stop. Didn't look. But her pace slowed. Just a little. And that was enough to make me stay another hour. When evening came, I wrote in my notebook. Not a list. Not a plan. Just a sentence. Maybe healing starts by setting the table for someone who never shows. I underlined it once. Not twice. Hope shouldn't be forced. Only offered. The next day, I baked lemon muffins. The smell filled the small room. Bright but not loud. I opened the front door. Let the scent drift outside. A breeze carried it down the sidewalk. Maybe to no one. Maybe to someone who needed a reason to slow down. I didn't have music. Didn't hang signs. But I placed a small note on the window. Tea. Warm. No questions. And I waited. Not with urgency. But with breath. Around noon, the bell above the door rang. I didn't jump. Just looked up. It was a woman. Hair tied back. Eyes red. No coat. She whispered, I don't know why I came in. I smiled. The kind that doesn't fix, just welcomes. I said, then let's start there. She sat, held the cup with both hands, and I thought, this isn't a business. This is a heartbeat with chairs, and for the first time in weeks I didn't feel like furniture. I felt like someone who could hold space, not for applause, not for thanks. Just so someone else didn't have to eat alone. The second woman came 2 days later. Rain was soft that morning, the kind that asks instead of demands. She held a small child. No umbrella. No coat. She didn't speak, just looked down at the chalkboard sign. I opened the door gently. She stepped in, shoes wet, hands trembling. I said, you can sit as long as you need. She did. Near the window, where the light felt less judgmental. I poured tea. The child slept on her shoulder. She didn't drink much, just held the cup, like it was a question she wasn't ready to answer. Before she left, she whispered, this is the first place I've breathed in days. Then she slipped a folded tissue on the table. Inside a pressed flower. I placed it in my notebook, next to the line about setting a table for someone who never shows. Only now someone had. That night I scrubbed the floor. No one asked me to, but the mop moved like it remembered old routines. I hummed. No song. Just sound to prove I still had breath. There was no applause. No certificate. Just the smell of lemon and wood. And a slow realization, this small room held more meaning than every Sunday I was forgotten. The kettle hissed again. I poured a second cup, just in case. Then I sat, not out of habit, but invitation, to myself. To the part of me that used to serve without being seen. And I said, you're still here. Still worthy. Even if no one notices. That was the night I lit the candle. Not for others. Not yet. But for me. Because even a quiet fire is still warmth. Even a small table can carry a whole kind of peace. By the end of the week, the table didn't feel empty. Even when I sat alone. Something about the way the chairs waited, not in pity, but in patience. I started placing 2 napkins. One folded sharp. The other soft at the edges. I don't know why. Maybe for balance. Maybe for memory. A man came by on Friday. Older. Wore a cap with a patch from a war no one asked about anymore. He didn't want tea. Just asked, mind if I sit a while. I nodded. Poured anyway. He held the cup but never drank. Told me about his wife. Gone 3 winters now. Said she used to hum while folding laundry. I listened. Didn't try to comfort. Just let the silence do its work. When he stood to leave, he said, you're the first person who's let me talk without changing the subject. Then he tipped his cap. Walked out. Left behind the sound of someone who had been heard. That night I wrote again. Maybe I don't need a full room. Just a room that knows how to hold a full heart. Then I underlined it. Twice. With a hand that no longer shook. Saturday came quiet. No visitors. Just dust in the sunbeams and the soft creak of an honest floor. I made a pot of tea anyway. Set 2 cups. Waited. And even when no one came, I stayed. Because it turns out some chairs are meant for hope itself. Around dusk, a girl knocked on the window. Maybe 12. Freckles. Eyes too cautious for her age. She pointed at the sign. I opened the door. She didn't come in. Just asked, is this real? I said, as real as you are. She didn't sit. Didn't speak more. But she smiled. One of those half-broken, still-trying smiles. Then she ran off. And still, that was enough. I looked at the empty chair she could have taken. And I whispered, maybe next time. Because sometimes planting peace is just leaving the door open long enough for someone to remember they are welcome. It began with a note. Not left for anyone else. But for me. Just 3 words written on a scrap of paper I tore from the back of a grocery list. Build the table. I pinned it near the kettle. So every time I poured water, it stared back. The old me would have laughed. Or folded it away. But not now. Now I listened to the small voice inside me that finally had room to speak. I walked past the empty store again. The one on First Street. Dusty windows. For lease sign still crooked. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned in. I could almost see it. 2 chairs. A soft tablecloth. The smell of tea instead of silence. I wrote down the phone number with a pencil that barely had lead. Called the next morning. A woman answered. Her voice had the kind of tired that comes from waiting too long for something to matter again. We talked. I told her I didn't want a shop. Not a business. Just a space. To sit. To pour tea. To remember that presence could still be offered freely. She paused. Then said, well, that's a first. But come by. Let's see. When I hung up, my hands were warm. Not from tea. But from doing something for myself. I didn't tell anyone. Not David. Not Melissa. Not even Edith, though she would have understood. This was mine. Not to hide, but to protect from interruption. That week I started clearing space. Not in the world. In me. Old drawers. Stacks of paper. Mugs I didn't love but kept anyway. I packed a box with only what mattered. My good kettle. 2 chipped cups. A small framed photo of my husband laughing. And a cloth napkin with faded blue embroidery that said welcome home. I whispered. To whoever needs it. And to me. Then I folded it. Gently. Like a vow. Because sometimes, a plan doesn't shout. It brews slowly. Like tea. And you only notice it's ready when it begins to feel warm from the inside out. The first time I stepped inside the empty shop, my feet left no sound. Just the hush of old wood, remembering footsteps from long ago. There was nothing. No shelves. No sign, no scent. But the air, it didn't push me out. It held me. I walked the length of the room. Sunlight streaked through high windows. Dust floated not like dirt, but like memory. In the far corner, I found a nail in the wall. Still there. Bent slightly like it had carried weight before. I smiled. Hung my scarf on it. Not because it belonged there. But because I did. The woman from the lease met me at noon. She wore corduroy and kindness. Didn't ask for a deposit. Just looked around and said this place needed a reason to breathe again. I nodded. Didn't promise anything. Just whispered, I'll keep it warm. That afternoon I swept the floor. Twice. Not because it was dirty, but because the act felt like honoring whatever came before me. I opened the back windows. Let the air move through like a blessing. Then I unpacked the kettle. Set it on the old countertop. Plugged it in. Waited for the first hiss. The water boiled slow. The way healing does. I didn't have furniture. Not yet. So I sat on the floor. Tea in hand. Back to the wall. Across from me a patch of light grew long and golden. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt not small. Not in the way they made me feel. But quiet. Like the beginning of something that didn't need anyone's permission. That night I wrote a sign on cardboard. It read, Table for 2. No charge. No noise. Just come. I placed it in the window, taped it gently with old painter's tape from a drawer I once called mine. The next morning, I made lemon muffins. They weren't perfect. A little lopsided. But they filled the air with something better than forgiveness. They smelled like I still care. And that was enough for a start. On the third day, I found a table. Round. A little scratched. The kind of wood that holds stories. The man selling it didn't ask questions. Just smiled and helped me lift it into the car. I wiped it clean. Twice. Not to make it shine. Just to say, I see you. The chairs came next. One with a soft cushion. Faded roses. The other bare, slightly uneven. They didn't match. But they belonged. I placed them by the window, where morning light lingered the longest. I brewed tea. Chamomile. The scent of quiet. Set out 2 cups. One for me. One for someone not here yet. I didn't write a sign. Didn't announce anything. Just poured. And waited. No one came that day. Still, I stayed. Listened to the kettle. Let the steam rise. Watched the dust settle gently on the shelf. That night, I lit a candle. Not for scent, but for softness. Its glow reached just far enough to warm the chairs without asking why they were empty. I wrote one line in my notebook: if no one saves you a seat, save one anyway. Then I underlined it. Once. The next morning, I wiped the table again. Pressed the cloth slowly along the wood grain. The room didn't echo anymore. It held breath. Not hope. Not yet. But breath. Later, a boy rode past on a bike. He looked in. Didn't stop. But his eyes met mine. He saw me. And somehow, that was more than I'd had in months. I closed the curtains partway. Let the light filter in soft. I didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just stood in the stillness I had chosen. There was no grand plan. No list, no schedule. Only tea. Chairs. And time. And that for now was enough. The bell above the door rang. It wasn't the sound that startled me. It was who came through. Melissa. Same coat. Same tidy hair. Same scent I could never name. She looked around slowly. Eyes scanning the shelves. The table. Then me. I didn't stand. Didn't speak. Just placed the second cup on the table across from mine. She hesitated. Then sat. Back straight. Hands folded too tightly. The kettle hissed between us. Like it remembered every silence we never named. I poured the tea. The way I always do. Steady. Without question. She didn't thank me. Didn't sip. Just looked at her cup like it held something heavier than steam. I waited. The kind of waiting only mothers know. Not rushed. Not soft. Just wide. Finally, she said, "We didn't know you left for this." Her voice was small. Smaller than I remembered. I nodded. Because that was true. She looked around again. At the candle. The 2 chairs. The photo Edith's niece drew taped crookedly on the back wall. "You built this?" she asked. Like it hurt to say it. "Yes," I said. With what I had left. A pause. She touched the rim of her cup. Still hadn't drunk. Then asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her. Not sharp. Not soft. Just steady. Because I had said everything. Every night I cooked. Every seat I gave up. Every bite I let grow cold. She blinked. Didn't argue. "We thought you needed space," she said. "You gave me space. I answered. But never a place. That landed. Like a stone in still water. Melissa looked down. Her hands now loose in her lap. She whispered. The girls ask about you. I didn't smile. Didn't awk. Just held that sentence like a leaf in one hand. Dry. But real. I said I'm still here. And she nodded. Small. Like she wasn't sure if she should cry. The candle flickered. Not out. Just enough to dance. She reached into her bag. Pulled out a photo. The girls. At recital. Smiling. She slid it across. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I said, some chairs are meant to stay empty until someone remembers how to ask. She looked at the picture. Then at me. Then down again. They miss your pancakes. She whispered. The bedtime song too. I didn't answer. Not with words. I just reached for the kettle. Refilled both cups. Set hers gently back in front of her. Still warm. Still full. She finally took a sip. I watched her shoulders soften. Not all at once. But enough. She said I didn't know what you were carrying. How lonely it must have been. I looked at her hands. Still clutched around the teacup. Like it might spill even when it hadn't moved. You didn't ask. I replied. And I forgot how to say it out loud. We sat in the quiet. Not broken, not stiff, just real. Melissa placed the photo back in her bag. Carefully. Like it might tear. She reached for something else. A tin. It was my tea tin. The one I kept above the microwave in my old kitchen. The green one with the chipped lid and the scent of dried lemon. I thought you'd want this. She said. I took it. Hands steady. Fingers remembering every morning it sat beside my mug. Thank you. I said. And meant it. She stood slowly. But didn't move away yet. The girls want to visit. If you're open to it. Not today. But sometime. I looked up. The light behind her made her look younger and older all at once. Tell them this place is always open. But the table only holds 2 at a time. Melissa nodded. Understood. She stepped toward the door. Then paused. Turned back. You seem more you. I didn't smile. Just nodded once. She opened the door. The bell rang. Soft and familiar. She left it open for one long second before it closed behind her. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing closure. I was holding it. I didn't move for a while. Just sat there, watching the door. Not expecting her to return. But letting the silence settle like dust finally given permission to land. Then I stood. Wiped the table. Not because it was messy. But because it felt right. The tea tin now back on the shelf beside the good cup. The chipped one. Still my favorite. At 4:20, Mr. Leo arrived. Like clockwork. He tipped his hat. Tapped his fingers on the table's edge. Same rhythm as always. I didn't say anything. Just poured. He took a sip. Then said, "You look like someone who stopped carrying the wrong weight." I smiled. The kind that starts in your spine before it reaches your mouth. At 5, Jean came in. Bright scarf, 2 wrapped candies. She left one on the sill. The other on the table. Didn't speak. Just nodded. Edith followed at 6. Her steps slower. But sure. She touched my arm. Held it a beat longer than usual. Then whispered, "The world can't take you if you don't hand yourself over." We laughed. Soft. Like old paper folding back into a book. The shop wasn't full. But the air felt held. No one raised voices. No one asked for space. They just took what was offered and gave back their presents. When the sun dipped low, I lit the little candle Melissa had brought, still unused, but not unacknowledged. It said peace quietly on the label. Fitting. I sat back down, refilled every cup, and thought, this is what justice can look like. Not thunder, not applause, just tea in a room you weren't supposed to survive in. And yet here you are, alive, gentle, and finally enough. The next morning, I opened the shop early, before the birds, before the street filled with footsteps that never looked up. The kettle hissed gently, and I moved slowly like someone who finally had nowhere to rush to, and nothing left to prove. I wiped down the table, pressed the cloth flat, the same way I used to smooth David's hair when he fell asleep in church. I laid out 2 cups. Even though I didn't know who might come, I've learned presence doesn't wait for plans. I brewed chamomile, the kind my husband liked after hard days. He used to say it tasted like quiet done well. The tea filled the room, soft steam rising, wrapping around the chairs like something that remembered how to hold you. I sat down, notebook in hand, hands steady now, wrinkles deeper but softer somehow. I turned to the last page and wrote, if no one remembers the meals I made or the beds I tucked in, let them remember this. That I stayed soft even after I was made invisible. At 10:30 the bell above the door rang. A young woman stepped in, maybe 20, eyes rimmed in exhaustion, carrying nothing, not even a coat. She hesitated, looked at the table, then at me, then down. I waited. Finally, she whispered, I don't know what I'm doing here. I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't try to fix, only makes space. I said, sit a while. We don't need to name it. She did. Slowly. Like her weight hadn't been welcomed in weeks. I poured the tea. She held the cup with both hands. Like it was the first warm thing all day. She didn't speak again. But her eyes grew wet. Not broken. Just seen. When she left, she touched my shoulder. Didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. Some things are understood without words. Especially between women who have carried silence for too long. I stayed at the table, looking around. At the mismatched chairs. The photo the girls drew last fall. Still taped crookedly above the shelf. 2 people. 1 heart between them. The candy from Edith. Still in its wrapper. Because I can't bring myself to eat it. The folded poem from the man who never returned. Still pressed between napkins. And my tea tin now full of scribbled notes. Stories. Left behind by people who just needed to matter. That night I didn't sleep early. I stayed by the window watching the street grow quiet. One by one, the lights in the shops turned off. But mine stayed on just a little longer. There was no music. No sign outside blinking. No open-close hours. Only the glow of something gentle and a chair still warm from someone who stayed. I walked around the room, fingers brushing each table edge. This place, it knew me now. Not just as the woman who pours tea, but as someone who remembered how to offer space without needing anything back. On the wall by the door I'd placed a small frame. Inside a note in David's handwriting. It said, I see it now. How we filled the house but not the space where you belonged. Below it I added a second line. My own. In pen. I never stopped hoping you would. Sometimes that's enough. Not a fix. Not a rewind. Just a moment where 2 truths can sit at the same table. In the basket near the kettle, I added a new page to the guestbook. It read, for anyone who has ever been talked over, talked past, or not talked to at all, this seat is yours. I folded a napkin beside it. Smooth. Precise. Like I used to do before every Sunday meal. The kind where someone always asked, "Is there more?" And I'd say, "Of course. There's always enough if you're still here." That's the rule of this place. Presence is the first ingredient. The late sunlight touches the wood grain of the old table, and for a moment, everything feels soft again. I've learned that legacy isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a name remembered in silence. And a pie shared with grace. What quiet legacy do you hope to leave behind? We'd love to read your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Your journey matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.